Yes, hello. It's Jason Louv. This is the Ultraculture podcast. And I'm just starting the podcast again after kind of slowly plodding through it for a couple years. I've only done about 5 episodes in the last 2 years, as I've been building up the Ultraculture website and social media and the Magick.me online education portal. And so the podcast has kind of taken a back seat in a way as I've been building up all this stuff online. I do all this stuff pretty much myself. I have some people who write for me, but the Ultraculture website and Magick.me kind of world is something I've created completely myself, from all of the business setup and legal and coding and writing and designing. And it's just a massive amount of work, which I love because it pushes me out into doing all kinds of different things and learning all kinds of new skills that I never learned as, for most of my life, I worked for other people or worked in offices. So now that I'm doing all this for myself, it's been an incredible eye-opening experience for me as I learn how to run a business. So that's a long way of saying I wish I'd been running a regular podcast up to this point. But the good news is now I finally feel that it's a good time to really jump in and do a regular podcast. So I'm hoping to and planning to have some incredibly exciting guests on this show in the coming weeks and months. I've already got some very, very, very exciting guests lined up that I'm not going to mention quite yet, but please stay tuned. There are some very exciting things in the works. But for today, it's right now it's the day before Thanksgiving, and things are kind of slowing down around here. So I wanted to just do a trial podcast, just kind of talking about things that I'm interested in and just kind of testing out, making sure that I can run all the software and equipment properly. And so for this one, I just wanted to do a solo podcast. And for this one, I wanted to talk about a very specific topic that I hear people talking about a lot, and which always comes up with the subject of magic, which if you follow my work, you know it's something that I'm interested in and that I teach online at Magick.me. People have a lot of misunderstandings about magic. When you say the word magic, particularly if you're really goofy and you spell it with a K like I do, because I like to be goofy, people immediately have all these associations that come into their mind. They might think about Dr. Faust or H.P. Lovecraft or all of these kind of horror movie associations that people have with magic. Or most people probably just think it's really silly, and they get images of kind of Wiccan kids at the mall food court playing Magic the Gathering and waving bow staffs around and that type of thing. And generally they think when you talk about magic, their assumption is that you're uneducated and that you don't have a modern scientific-based education. And nothing could really be further from the truth. In my life, many of the most intelligent, brilliant, questioning, and creative people that I've met have had an interest in the kind of the subtle powers of the mind, and certainly of kind of the more subtle ways of looking at reality, or more mystic ways of looking at reality. Because if you think about it, and I'm sure you have before, the thing that unites the most brilliant minds in the world is a quest to understand the unknown, and a quest for more, a quest for understanding more than the general workaday world. In our culture, we are expected to grow up, go to school, get a job, maybe work our way up, raise a family. And of course, none of that is particularly stable or solid for anybody anymore. All of that has kind of been thrown into turmoil by the accelerating rate of technological change and social change, and certainly the economic crisis. But regardless, people are kind of sold a very limited view of reality and what they can be. And one thing, and I think that the thing that brilliant people that I know have in common is that they're not satisfied with that. They want something more for themselves. They want to understand reality. And they know that, because by studying history, they know that there's no way that we can know everything about reality. They know that all of the great thinkers of history have been heretical thinkers, and they're just not satisfied with the current view of reality as it's presented. So I think that an interest in the unknown or the mystical is very healthy and very common among people who are unorthodox thinkers. So, but the second thing that people think about when they are confronted with the idea of magic is this kind of scary image that magic is something taboo, that it involves trifling with forces that you don't understand, that it will bring darkness and woe into your life. Or certainly people have, unfortunately, they have associations with Satanism. And these are things that I really want to put to rest because I don't think they're helpful and I don't think they're true. And so the topic of this podcast is what is the difference between white magic and black magic? Now I say what is the difference between white magic and black magic, not because if you talk to experienced magicians or people who have been engaged in esoteric spiritual traditions or serious practices for a long time, you'll never really hear them use the phrase black magic or white magic. They just tend to talk about magic because practicing magicians have more of a sense of the magic being an extension of the human will, right? Magic is just a kind of a shorthand for talking about what you can do when you harness the entirety of the human nervous system towards one goal. So experienced magicians, particularly chaos magicians, don't really divide magic into there's such a thing as white magic or black magic. They just tend to see it as an extension of human activity. And they tend to talk about it in terms more like, well, were you doing your true will? Were you being true to your core self? Were you being true to yourself while you were doing magic in a way? So in that sense, experienced magicians don't really talk about white magic or black magic, but I want to take that on and take this phrasing on. What is the difference between white magic and black magic, just for the purpose of this podcast? And the reason I want to do that is because that's a question people always ask. If you talk about it, you're into magic, people will often say, well, are you into black magic? Are you into white magic? And people who don't really know a lot about it will draw those arbitrary lines. But let's take that on. Let's look at that for the point of this podcast, and let's talk about what is functionally good magic and what is functionally bad magic, and look at the ethics of magic, because this is certainly the ethics of magic is something I've been very concerned with and very interested in for a long time. I've spent 15 years in the kind of the occult scene, jumping around between different groups, learning from different people, different spiritual traditions, whether those are the Hermetic and Chaos Magic schools or the Tantric schools of Eastern mysticism or Sufism or, lots and lots of different Buddhism, lots and lots of different ways and models of looking at the world. And from that experience, I've learned a lot of incredible things. One of the biggest of which is how differently different cultures see the world, and also how similarly different cultures see the world, and how similar people are once you kind of take away the jargon and the language and you cut it down to the core of what people are engaging in these practices to experience. I think that across the world, with mystical traditions in particular, people are looking for a transcendent connection to something that's bigger than themselves. They want to be in touch with the good in the universe. They want to know that the universe cares about them. They want to have an experience that takes them outside of themselves and that shows them that the universe is a good and loving place, which it is. And some people might call that experience Jesus. Some people might call it Ganesh or Shiva or Hanuman. Some people might call that Buddha or Avalokiteshvara, or the goddess. Many different traditions have different names for these things. But at the core, people are people. And people, people want love. They want a sense of security. They want a sense of safety and of being, they want to have a sense of being held by the universe. And this is something that mysticism and magic can show you very viscerally. When you engage in esoteric practices and you access universal consciousness and you learn to still your mind and still your ego and step outside of yourself, really, and you can have a direct experience of this. And this is the real draw of esotericism and mysticism over kind of rote religion, because religion tends to give people a dogma or a book, and religion says this is how it is, and if you follow these rules, everything will be okay. Whereas esoteric spirituality or magic or mysticism says, here's a set of techniques that if you do, you will have certain experiences, and then you can draw your own conclusions, but it will be from firsthand experience instead of secondhand learning, right? So that's really, for me, the core of magic. And before we get into the question of black and white magic, I really want to ground this conversation in that understanding, right? Which is, magic is a goofy word. It has all these potentially unfortunate connotations, but at its core, what it is, and certainly what I'm trying to communicate by using that word, is that longing, that core longing of human beings to contact transcendent reality, to contact the magical nature of the universe, to contact the creativity and infinite intelligence of the universe, and not just as a New Age thing, but as a very tangible, visceral, living experience. And anyone can do that. And there are techniques written down to do that. And that's largely what magic and largely what mysticism is. The transcendent urge to union with the divine. Outside of, in a kind of scientific way. And I don't mean scientific. I mean scientific in the sense of a rigorous, empirical way of doing experiments and seeing what happens. And working at it like any other discipline, working at it like a martial art until, trying different techniques, whether those are techniques from books or living teachers you have access to or spiritual traditions that you have access to, and trying things until you hone down what really works for you, right? Because one thing that I've learned, and one thing that I think that magic is really good at understanding, is different people have different methods. Different things work for different people in different ways. There's not one true path for everybody, in the way that religion, in some religions, often insists there is one true path to having a transcendent experience. I think that magic is very good at recognizing that people have very different temperaments. Some people, for instance, are very intellectual and really love to study religious books and, labor over Kabbalistic texts or translating Sanskrit or seeking out knowledge in books, and they have a basically intellectual temperament, so they pursue spirituality in an intellectual way. Whereas some people are very emotional. They're very emotionally centered. So they might pursue spirituality through singing and dancing, group singing or kirtan or bhakti yoga, which is the devotional love of God, right? A very deep, emotional, passionate, loving experience of an emotional connection to divinity, right? And there are specific techniques for doing that. Most of them coming from India, under the phrase bhakti yoga. Or some people are very physically oriented, work oriented. And so some people will seek spirituality by doing good works in the world, or, doing charitable acts, or serving the poor or homeless people in their community. And that's what we might call karma yoga. That's called karma yoga in India, which is kind of union by action in a way. And so that's certainly not, those are just a few paths. But, and a person might try many different things, right? Instead of, they might not be a pure knowledge yogi or a pure bhakti yogi. They might try many different paths. But I hope what you're beginning to get from this is magic is not a dogma. It's not a set practice. It's a whole grab bag or toolbox of different techniques and tools that different people will gravitate to in different ways. So it's this exciting, and it's kind of like, for me, magic is kind of like stepping into, like a warehouse, or like like a store full of a toy store. It's like stepping into a toy store full of all these different techniques and tools from all these different traditions, and kind of running around and looking for the things that work for you the best and playing with them, and then running off to play with something else. And it's a really exciting pursuit. So that's how I look at magic. That's how I approach it. And the core is, what can you do that gets you outside of yourself? What can you do that gets you into an expanded sense of what's possible? What can you do that gets you into an expanded sense of what's real and who you can be and what the universe is? What shakes you up? And that, for me, is what we should be concerned with doing, which is growing, right? Using different tools and experience to grow as human beings and as spiritual beings, and play in the universe, because the universe wants us to play, and the universe likes to play with us, not in a mean way, but in a loving way. So with that ground, let's talk about what is white magic and what is black magic. So that's kind of a very lofty. The description of magic I've just given you is very lofty in a way. But when people talk about magic, they might get this dark imagery, right? Where they imagine people in robes, doing unspeakable rites, and all of the silliness that we've kind of inherited from Hollywood, or the old Hammer horror movies from the 60s with Christopher Lee. And that's kind of really exciting for some people. But real magic is not like that. So what is white magic? Right? White magic, to take an arbitrary look at it, or the proper use of magic, is kind of what I think I just said, which is magic that bigs you up, magic that builds you up, builds up your self-esteem, builds up your sense of yourself, gets you ready to do great things in the world, If you do a yoga practice, for instance, if you go to yoga classes or you do yoga on your own, and you feel really good when you come out of it, and you have a sense of, heightened self-esteem and heightened self-confidence, or anything like that. Even if it's a traditional ceremonial magic where you're doing invocations and reaching out to different god forms. And when you do a invocation like that, if you properly invoke a god form, then you will have a heightened experience of yourself. You will be, you'll have an experience, if you do it right, you'll have an experience of unifying with a cosmic principle, right? Like for instance, Thoth being the god of knowledge. If you do a ritual for Thoth, you will find yourself unified with the great principle of knowledge and intelligence in the universe. And white magic has this, or the proper approach to magic, it's always about, it kind of is always about getting an expanded sense of the universe and an expanded sense of what's possible. And at the same time, paradoxically, you tend to feel smaller. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You feel smaller out of kind of awe or gratitude or thankfulness, because you have a heightened sense of how big the universe is and how many experiences there are that are out there that are waiting for you to have them. So I mean, you feel a little bit smaller in kind of, your ego feels less important. You feel less full of yourself. And that's very healthy, right? A lot of people talk about, and I've written about this, a lot of people talk about this kind of idea of destroying the ego, or that we should, constantly be putting ourselves down to lessen our ego. So if somebody's uncomfortable with us or our opinions, they'll often say, well, you have such a big ego. You really need to check your ego at the door. Well, I think that's a mistake. It's a mistake to try and directly shrink your own ego. I mean, we have an ego for a reason, in the same way that we have an appendix for a reason, and we shouldn't cut it out. When you do, magic in this way, when you do magic to connect to the universe as a living process, and you do magic to connect with the transcendental nature of reality, you feel smaller not because you've shrunk, right? Like, you're probably actually growing quite a bit through experiences like that, but you feel smaller because the universe feels bigger. As your sense of the universe widens and gets bigger and bigger, and your horizons expand more and more, and you see the splendor and the wonder of the universe more and more, then by comparison, the construction that you call your personality, right, which is really just a jumble of imprints and conditioning and responses that you've had to your environment in the past, and language and cultural programming and social programming, the thing that you call your personality is kind of more or less a robot mixed up of stimulus responses. And when you have these big scale transcendental experiences that show you how big the universe is, then your personality just looks smaller by comparison, right? But that's really good. It's really humbling in a good way, because it shows you how much you have to grow, right? And how you can grow, and how you can push out of yourself and reach up higher and be more. Because the alternate is, in normal waking consciousness, for most people, in normal working consciousness or wakeful normal, consciousness as they're going through the day, if you're like me, you're probably stuck in your head a lot of that time, where, you're focused on what you have to do that day, your to-do list, your anxieties about the future, your potentially negative feelings about things that have occurred in the past, your anxieties about social interactions with other people or relationships with other people. And so most of the day you're responding to things, and then you're stuck in the kind of stimulus response where if you're at work, you have to respond to the demands of your boss or your coworkers. And if you work on a computer or you're near a cell phone, as most of us are, you're constantly subjected to status updates and alerts and emails and beeps coming at you from your phone or your computer. And then if you're driving, you're just reacting to the road and all of this. So for most of the time, your focus during your day is put on very small things, things that are where you're stuck dealing with minutia, right? When you do a ritual, when you meditate or you do a full-scale magical ritual, you're essentially creating a space in which you're giving yourself permission to change your focus for a set period of time to something much bigger. If you've set up the ritual properly, then you've removed all external distractions. You might have drawn a circle and done proper ceremonial procedures and things like these, or you're sitting in your meditation posture, or and it doesn't have to be elaborate at all. But you've created a space in which you've said to yourself, okay, in this space, in this chunk of time and space I've set aside for myself, I'm not going to be focusing on anything except the goal of my ritual, whether that's to contact a god or simply to focus on the immensity of the universe itself. And so when as they say in NLP, your focus determines your reality. So when you give yourself time, space, and a little bit of breathing room to viscerally shift your focus and shift your awareness into the cosmic, or the transcendental, or the divine, or the spiritual, or the numinous, or whatever language you want to put on it, or whatever specific ritual you might be doing, then the working world fades away, and all of a sudden you can have deeply transcendental and divine experiences of, the conscious nature of the universe, or of reality itself, or divine entities, perhaps gods, goddesses, a sense of being centered in what you might call your true self, or a sense of being centered in your highest qualities, your sense of love, your sense of gratitude, your sense of compassion, your desire to give to the world, your desire to give back, your a sense of deep connection to the people that you love the most, or even a sense of love and caring for the whole universe, for the whole world. Right? This is something that certainly the magical traditions, but certainly also the Buddhists or Hindus or different magical cultures have been telling us for a long time, to remember to focus on the important things in life, in a really big and dramatic way if need be. So that for me is what white magic per se is. It's setting aside the trivia of our lives and taking time to immerse ourselves in remembering this incredible, fascinating, loving, conscious, sparkling, twinkling, playful process that we live in, this gigantic universe that we live in. And in a visceral, in a tangible way. That's why I like magic. That's why I like magical ritual, because it's not just a head thing. It's not just, I read it in a book, or, like this book says so-and-so about the universe, or I read a blog post that was kind of inspiring. And so, no, when you do magic, it's full contact. You use your whole body to understand and enact a principle, and until it becomes so real that that's the only reality for you for that set period of time. You're using your bodily motions and your you might be using a mantra, or you might have music going and incense and lights and artistic creations you've made around you, or symbols you've made, There should be something going for all your senses: sight, smell, touch, taste, hearing. It's like you're creating this full-on, almost virtual reality experience for yourself when you do a magical ritual, to fully enter into and experience either the totality of the universe or one specific aspect of the universe that you want to engage with. So it's an amazing art form and martial art of consciousness in a way, and when you get good at it too, when you cut through the jargon and the bullshit, which there's so much of. I mean, you read these books on magic and you wade through all this Kabbalah and you wade through all of this, all these kind of arcane theosophical terms or overwritten language, padded out to make the books bigger and more saleable. When you wade through all that, and I love all that stuff too, and it's really important, but when you wade through it and when you get down to actually practicing it, it'll just click. You get a sense of how easy it is and how intuitive it is, and it should feel natural, like a natural extension of your being. And it's amazing how, I think a lot of people, when they start doing magic, when they really get into it, it's like, wow, this feels really, it's almost like more intuitive and more innate than, for instance, going to the office and sitting in front of a computer all day long and doing Excel spreadsheets. That's not natural, That's, doing Excel all day or whatever it is one might happen to do at their job. If you're sitting in front of a computer, that's not what people are made for. People are made for running around out in the nature and, fighting and having sex and engaging in the deep mythic nature of reality. And magic and shamanism and ritual have been part of our species for so long, for millennia. Far, far longer than, the current big religions. The big religions have not really been around for very long. Far longer than science, which is wonderful, and I think science is the great hope of humanity. I never want to put science and magic in opposition to each other, because I see science as an outgrowth. Pure science, trying to understand the universe. I see, science was the child of alchemy, and I see science as being a working perfectly in tandem with magic and an extension of the magical process, which is just the great quest to understand knowledge, right? It's just that science is specialized and tends to be focused on the world of matter and material manifestation, right? Whereas magic, ceremonial magic per se, is much more focused on the numinous and meaning, how meaning is constructed, emotions, feelings, subjective experiences of existence, which is totally outside of the purview of modern science for the most part. So, but my point being that, all of our current understandings of reality are very recent. And when you engage with ritual and ceremony and meditation and these kind of spiritual forms, it's kind of like part of you wakes up and you're like, oh, this is what my ancestors did. This is so viscerally real. And it's like, I understand how to do this intuitively. And it just feels good. It feels like a natural thing that people would do. So that's what I really mean by white magic. And of course, people can do it in groups too, and can, build themselves up. And so I look at magic and with that kind of mindset, and, and I don't like that people make it into an elitist activity. I don't like that people make it more complicated than it is. They're more complicated than it needs to be. Because, having traveled within magical cultures like India or Buddhist countries or, Nepal is a great example. If you go to Nepal, that's a country where everyone is doing magic all of the time. In the Kathmandu Valley, which I visited many times, there's this great psychedelic fusion of Hindu cultures and Buddhist cultures and shamanistic cultures, and everyone gets along and everyone kind of shares their gods and all the practices overlap. And it's just this incredible psychedelic city where everywhere you look, there's a statue for a different god, where people are putting, red paste on it, or offering flowers, and somebody's doing a ritual here, someone's doing a ritual there. It's like, and you're living in like a magical enlightenment computer in a way. And everywhere is like a Buddhist stupa, or a lot of this sadly was destroyed in the earthquake, the recent earthquake. It's very, very sad. But when you go to cultures like that, you just get it, you understand it, and you also realize that that in the West, this materialistic view of that only what you see is the only thing that's real. And it's just, money is what's real, and it's just nihilism, and just what whatever you see on TV, that's what's real. And getting a lease on a car, that's what's real. And your job, that's what's real. That's really, you realize the more you engage in this, that's really a minority view in the world. The magical view, or the kind of the magical or pagan view of reality, which I see as just understanding that the universe is alive with meaning, and it can be interacted with directly as a tangible, visceral thing, and that you can do a little ritual to feel good, or you can do, say certain things, or vibe yourself up to feel good in certain ways, or change your mind, and that things like mastering the mind is really important, or meditation is really important. We're kind of in the minority in a way. I mean, you think about India as 1 billion people, right? And then you add all the, I don't know how many Buddhists are in the world, but I think it's something like 600 million or something like that. Don't quote me on that, but it's a lot. It's a lot, right? And I feel my experience of interacting with people from magical cultures is they kind of see us as a little bit challenged, a little bit mentally challenged, perhaps. Where I think that somebody who has that full spectrum magical take on existence, and that spiritual take on existence, I think kind of looks at us as like we're living in black and white, It's kind of like, I think that and I love Western culture, so I'm not downplaying it all, but downplaying it at all, and I'm not downplaying it all at all, right? But I think that, we lack meaning in this culture. We lack kind of heart and soul. We've got all the external riches and trappings that people from these cultures don't have. We've got all these beautiful houses and cars and computers and Apple Watches and all that. And that's stuff that the average individual in India or Nepal will never have. Their dreams are to get an American motorcycle and Big Macs and things like that. That's what they want. But you go to these places and you realize, it's like Western people are missing. It's like we're missing this crucial piece of ourselves. Whether you want to call it I wouldn't call it the soul, but it's like it's just a sense of being connected to the universe. And I don't want to make that sound too new agey, but it's kind of a sense of, being part of something. Western people feel very isolated. They feel very disconnected and alienated and alone and lonely and nihilistic, and they feel like life is meaningless. Whereas for a person from a magical or a pagan culture, it feels much more like you feel more like a part of nature. You feel part of something greater, part of a greater whole, and immersed in the spiritual process of the universe, and immersed in connection and interconnectedness and heart. And because of that, and my experiences of traveling particularly, have really convinced me that people in the West are really poor. We're in a state of emotional and spiritual poverty, because all the riches in the world will, it's like that classic thing, a man, what does it benefit a man were he to gain the entire world and lose his soul, right? Because we have all the riches, all the money, all the beautiful things, but we feel empty inside. I think most Western people feel empty, and people talk, you see people talking about this online and on talk shows and in the media all the time. They feel this void or this emptiness that they had to fill with addiction or one, acting out behaviors or materialism or, never quite being satisfied. And I think that's a state of poverty. That's a real state of poverty. So, I think that's one reason why I think that magic is something that can be of use and of interest to modern people. Despite the fact that it's a little weird, it's a little bit Renaissance fair, it's a little bit, arcane, and it feels kind of old. But, magic is the Western culture's version of that. The magical tradition. If you go the Hermetic magical tradition, that magic is a Renaissance era word for the Hermetic tradition, which was kind of the underground magical pagan culture that was very prevalent in academic circles or the elite thinking circles, particularly among Renaissance thinkers or the early scientists. Is where the early scientists came out of. People like Isaac Newton or Giordano Bruno. And the Western magical, the Hermetic view was the exact same as what I'm talking about. It's this sense of everything in the universe is connected and everything is alive and breathing and flowing and, everything is laden with significance and, every flower you look at, every, animal you see, every bird in flight, every, marvelous natural vista you see is God talking to you. Right, using the language of nature to communicate to you, and so that people are in the world to experience the gradual unfolding of their own souls by seeing them projected into the world around them, into nature. Right. So the West has its own version of this. We don't have to. It's a cliche that to talk about young people. We kind of young hippies going on a spiritual quest. Right, you talk about kind of young, lefty hippies. They're at a lefty college and might smoke too much dope, and then the next thing you know, they're kind of getting into Eastern philosophy and getting into Buddhism, and the Dalai Lama, and Hinduism, and yoga, and all these different things, or Native American culture, and that's kind of a cliche, right? And I'm sure we all know people like that, or we've been that person. I certainly have. But it's something that people haven't quite realized yet, and they're beginning to realize more and more, is that we don't actually have to look that far. The West has its own version of this. It's the Hermetic tradition. It's what has been called traditionally magic, right? And I didn't make that word up. I've inherited it. It's kind of unfortunate in a way, but I kind of like it in a way too, because it's silly and goofy and exciting and suggests, power and potential and all of this. The magical tradition is our version of this. It's our quest for the soul, our own soul, or the world's soul, or the, our quest to be grounded in meaning, our quest to be conscious participants with the universe instead of passive observers, our quest to move from the edges of the dance floor, our quest to stop being a wallflower and get to the center of the dance floor, where we're right there in the center of the action, dancing with the universe. Excited and passionate I am about these things because I really think that they can tell us something about ourselves that we're missing. And not just that we're missing, but that we really have a hunger for. And as a culture that we've forgotten about and pushed to the sidelines and said, maybe that's too scary, maybe I don't want to look at that. And it's kind of like the missing piece, the missing piece that we need to become whole. And it doesn't have to be, magic by any other name, right? But I think a direct engagement with spirituality. So with all that said, okay, so what is black magic, right? Now here's a more sensationalistic topic, right? Is there such a thing as black magic? Are there really, evil people out there doing evil deeds and using these forces for nefarious means to, make our investments tank or our cow stop producing milk or whatever, whatever it is. Now, before I get into that, I really want to get into the historical context of this question. This is something that I've just been researching recently, which is really, really fascinating and important, has been important for me personally to see, which is where this idea of black magicians and witches came from. In Elizabethan England, right? Queen Elizabeth I was really presided over kind of the height of psychedelic culture of England at that time. Elizabethan England was very much like the 1960s, right? Where it was colorful and it was high culture and it's Shakespeare, and there was a sense of magic and the possibilities everywhere. And, Elizabeth I was referred to as the fairy queen. There was a sense of enchantment about her, like she was bigger than life, and there was something almost fairy-like or supernatural about her but she was brilliant and much more educated and smarter and sharper and faster than most of the women, most of the men in her, or in fact all of the men in her court, and certainly rivaled or was even smarter than most of the top scientific minds of her time. And this is a brilliant, brilliant woman. And she, was presiding over, a post-Catholic England. This was an England that had split from, thanks to Henry VIII, right, had split from the Catholicism and split from the domination of the church. So after doing this, it was like a huge party, right, where all of the liberatory energy and the sense of life and excitement and joy de vivre and magic and possibility was really coming out, and it was a party society. And crucial to Elizabeth's reign also was John Dee, who's really the great motherlode of Western esotericism. This is the great magus of Elizabethan England, and he's the one who channeled Enochian magic and was also very involved in occult activities for the throne and occult spying. He was referred to as 007, right? Was it the 007 came from D? That was his designation when he was spying for Elizabeth. And this was a man who was engaged for over 10 years in contacting angels and speaking, having long, complex mathematical discussions with angels about the nature of reality. And that's a huge topic. And I actually there's an ebook that I wrote online called The Angelic Reformation that's just about John Dee in this period and the magic of Elizabethan England, which is short and very cheap. So I recommend checking that out if you want to know more about this. But the point that I want to impress on you for our purposes here is that Elizabethan England was a high psychedelic, high adventure, high magic culture. Now, what happened was after Elizabeth died, James I came into power. Her successor, James I, was an extreme Christian Puritan fundamentalist. And James, with every political shift, with every political power shift, the new boss has to do away with the world of the old boss. And so James I came into power and got rid of this whole psychedelic magic culture. And this is, he printed the King James Bible, which I'm sure you know, which is the first real mass printing of the Bible, so everyone could have one, which is great. Really improved literacy rates and all of this. But, but in tandem with this, he really cracked down on anything to do with magic. And this is really when the real paranoia about witches started. He was incredibly paranoid that witches were everywhere and witches were out to get him. A lot of people have theorized that this might be because of ergot fungus rot that grew on wheat at the time, contained endogenous LSD, or excuse me, not endogenous, but contained an analog to LSD. And that basically people were tripping. And so he was probably having a bad trip constantly from eating this infected bread and thinking there were witches everywhere and they were all out to get him. So he really was the guy that instituted that whole witch crackdown, the witch burning thing, and all these, poor women were tortured and imprisoned under this, and John Dee was, certainly defunded and put out to pasture at a Catholic university. And as part of this, there was a real propaganda war. And this is what I want you to understand. There was a concerted propaganda effort to bury Magick that is still with us today, to this very day, from this time period. So it's from this time that we get, for instance, James funds Christopher Marlowe, who was a rival to Shakespeare, and he has Marlowe write Dr. Faustus, right, which is this classic play of the sorcerer that has gone too far and dabbled with dark forces, and the devil has come to get them, and it's all terrible and dreadful. And that was a parody of John Dee, right? And they implanted this idea into the mass consciousness that Magick was evil, and it would come get you in the end, and all these dark forces and all of that, and that really cut deep. That's a deep archetype, a deep symbol within Western consciousness. And it's also during this time that actually there was a guy named Merrick Casaubon, who was also employed by James I to discredit all magic or claims of supernatural things or cosmic or psychedelic things, directly employed by the crown to discredit all this stuff. So actually Casaubon, ironically, was the first person to publish John Dee's work, but in the context, in a book called A True and Faithful Relation, but in the context of, look at this stuff. Look how crazy this is. Here's a guy that went too far. It's the classic mad scientist image. This guy went too far in the name of science or the name of magic. And but of course, even Casaubon, reading Dee's material, could only conclude, this was a man of true faith, a man of true piety, but he was clearly tricked by evil spirits into dabbling in forces that should not be dabbled with. So, and thankfully, ironically, that's why John Dee's work survives to the present day. So, kind of went on another tangent there, but the point is that deeply embedded in this idea was deeply embedded in the Western mind that magic is evil, magic is bad, magic will cause you misfortune, that it will lead you into the arms of the devil himself, right? But that's a political move. It was a move to bury the freedom that was experienced in Elizabethan England and replace it with Puritan oppression. I think it's that simple. And I think that a good analogy to perhaps our lifetimes, depending on how old you are, is to think about the transition that happened from 1960s America to 1980s America. If you think about the 60s of rock music and Jim Morrison and the Doors and psychedelics and Woodstock and bra burning and all this craziness, Dionysiac revelry in the streets and all of this, and people just opening up all the way and having these incredible experiences, and also negative experiences and good trips and bad trips and just total chaos, right? But if you think about the transition that happened between there and the conservative backlash to when Ronald Reagan came into power in the 80s, and all of a sudden America was very buttoned down, and you think about Michael J. Fox and Family Ties, that type of thing. And very religious and fundamentalist, and the return of the Christian right, and it's swinging back into control and dogma and patriarchy and all of this type of thing. So I think that's a good analogy to think about this cultural transition that happened. But for hundreds of years, magic has been seen as a negative activity, and it's partly because of this. And, magic was incredibly underground until, and basically non-existent until around, more or less, until Victorian England. It was resurrected by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And, there was a real magical renaissance around the turn of the century. And it's from that we get people like Crowley and Austin Spare. And now, I think that our cultural period now might be another real magical renaissance, in the same way that Elizabethan England or the 1960s were. because it's out there and everyone's talking about it. And so I think that it's time to let go of these negative images or these fearful ideas, that we inherit from Dr. Faustus, or maybe we inherit from reading H.P. Lovecraft stories, or that we inherit from horror movies or Hammer horror, because they're not helpful, and they tend to, what tends to happen is people start to do magic and they can kind of wig themselves out because all these images come flooding back, and all these deep-seated fears, that have been embedded in our culture for hundreds of years, that are basically control switches put in place so that people don't dabble with it, and don't experience that type of radical empowerment for themselves. All of that comes flooding back, and all that imagery, those internal representations, combined with maybe guilt or shame or religious imprints from childhood, it can all come flooding back, and that can be a really tangible, visceral, negative experience for people. But it's just the imprints, in their own mind, coming back to haunt them in a way. It's not necessarily any type of external thing. It's just all their negative cultural programming or religious programming returning with a vengeance. So, but to put all that to the side also, certainly people have used magic for negative purposes. Often you might run into people who are, I think that anytime somebody uses magic to influence the behavior of somebody else, even if it's positive, that we might consider that black magic, because you should never try and tamper with the will of another being without consent, So I think that anytime somebody's trying to get, if especially young people, when they first get into this, will often do things like, well, I'm going to do a spell to get so-and-so to fall in love with me, right? Or to get revenge against the playground bully, or, that type of thing. People find out really quickly that that's very, very unproductive, because, you get the person that you wanted to fall in love with you, and then you realize you're miserable, and, you're stuck with this person and they're a total psycho, and, clingy, or, actually not what you needed at all. Or, I think that anytime you want to influence the will of another person, that's immediately getting into ethically questionable territory. Even if it's for healing purposes, you never want to try and tamper with somebody else's course through life, because that's their business. It's not your business. So I think that's a crucial distinction. All good magic is magic that you do on yourself, right? It's to big yourself up. And my vision of a good magician is a kid who maybe is in a hopeless place and feels that they have no power and no agency and no future, like the Sex Pistols song, no potential of doing anything in their life. And they use magical techniques or NLP techniques, and they study it, and they start to realize that they can change their image of themselves, and they can change their image of what the universe is, and they can start to build themselves up and build themselves up and build themselves up until they really vibe themselves up all the way, until eventually they come to this perspective of like, fuck, like I have total, absolute ability to do whatever it is that I want in life. I have total ability to engage in the universe fully. If I just build myself up and I master my internal states, and I think like a magician, and that means looking at systems around you to understand, closely examining yourself to see how you work, closely examining the world to see how it works, so that you can understand the systems around you and know how to work with them instead of against them or against the grain. And eventually you get to this place of total self-agency where you feel like, I can yes, I can take on the world. I can do whatever it is that I feel most called to do, whether it's to become a great artist or a politician or a banker or whatever it is that you might consider to be your, golfer, whatever it is that you might consider to be your goal, your true innate talent that you were born with and that your mission that you feel called to. But that suddenly becomes not scary. It becomes exciting, and it becomes possible, right? And eventually you kind of get to a point where all the magic tools and arcane stuff and the theories and formula kind of fall away, and you realize that they've just been training wheels to get you to a certain point where you have a magical consciousness and you're able to just tackle life from that perspective of magical consciousness. It's like that you have the magical ability to flow with reality towards your goal. So that's white magic. That's real magic. That's doing magic on yourself to make yourself into the best possible version of yourself. And we might consider, for convenience's sake, black magic to be trying to influence the wills of other people, right, in a negative way, or even in a positive way, without their consent, right? And A, it never works. B, it tends to just cause suffering for the person who's trying to do that. And C, it's not nearly as an effective approach to life as looking at yourself and thinking, how can you change yourself? A classic example would be the love spell again. If you have somebody who's saying, oh, well, I'm going to do a spell to get X, Y, and Z to fall in love with me. Well, maybe what you need to do is to take a step back and think about yourself and say, well, okay, A, what do I really want? Am I just fixated on this person because I've suddenly got, inflamed with lust, and I've just decided that this is a person that I need in my life? Is it really this person? Or do I need to think about, okay, what do I really want? What do I really need from a relationship? What, do I want to be in a relationship? What are my actual goals? What's going to help me grow as a person the most? And then saying, okay, once I have my goal in place, how do I need to change in order to achieve that goal? If I want to be in a loving, committed relationship with somebody, how do I need to change so that I'm a loving and committed person? How do I need to change so that I'm ready for that type of thing? Do I need to set aside negative hobbies? Do I need to set aside, maybe negative people in my life? Do I need to change the way I look at myself? Do I need to change my sense of self-esteem? Do I need to really understand, really have a sense of love for myself, right? Do I need to be okay with who I am and accept who I am so that I have love for myself, and then can extend that into a loving relationship? Do I need to change the way I dress? Do I need to, change my hygienic habits? Do I need to, what do I need to do in order to be the person who can be in the type of relationship that I want, right? Because change happens inside first, and then the universe, and then we vibrate to that level of the universe in a way. The universe matches us at our level, right? Change never happens by trying to grab something in the universe. It happens by earning it from within. And once you cause that change within yourself, then the universe tends to match it when you're ready for it, right? Because you could just end up in a committed relationship but not be ready to deal with it at all, right? So then once you have those goals in mind and kind of a roadmap for how you're going to get there, then you can say, okay, well, what type of magic can I do? If I need to do magic, you might not need to do magic. What kind of magic can I do to turn myself into that person? So, you might want to think about all kinds of techniques. You might want to study the magic of fashion and glamour. You might want to study yoga, the physical fitness and physical, study yoga so that you're very comfortable within your own skin, right? Yoga is a great technique for feeling really comfortable with who you are. You might want to study meditation so that you cut through the mental noise and that you can begin to get down to the core of what your real desires are, instead of just the passing noise that comes through at you from electronic media and your own distracted thoughts. You might want to And then you might want to do magical rituals like invoking, Aphrodite, the goddess of love from Greek mythology, or comparable goddesses from other mythologies, to tap into that universal principle of love and affection so that you can understand it viscerally and tangibly, and it informs you, and that you get that, so that's a much better way of proceeding. So again, I keep coming back to the white magic approach because I think that's really what's important to dwell on. But I also want to show you why it's more effective and more useful and a better use of your time, essentially. Because if you do it that way, let's take our love example again. If you do it that way, if you do it the quote unquote black magic way to just get someone to fall in love with you, then you've just done that. Even if it worked, you haven't changed as a person. You haven't changed as a person, right? And you've you may end up stuck with a person you don't want to be stuck with. You may not have the emotional maturity to be able to handle your results. Whereas if you take the quote unquote white magical approach and build yourself up into being the type of person that is ready for that, let me tell you, you're going to have your pick of the litter, right? Because you've changed yourself. Now you're not focused on one person. You're going to have your pick of the litter because you've turned yourself into the person that's going to be ready for that, and there will be abundance of opportunities, right? So because you're changed, and that change is permanent. It's not dependent on another person, and as I'm sure you know, the fastest way to kill attraction is to make your life dependent on another person, right? If your whole existence is dependent on one person fulfilling your happiness, you're going to have a bad time, and that person is going to be really, unless they're the type of person that wants to get into a codependent relationship with you, which is not going to be fun for you either, then that's probably going to scare people away, right? So, but you see that if you turn yourself into the type of person that just is going to have that type of experience abundantly everywhere around them, then the universe will match you, and you're not going to have any problem, right? So that's just one example. So in general, I think that black, quote unquote, black magical approaches are often about getting one thing. They're very materialistic. They're very much about seeing experiences, even spiritual experiences, as objects that can be grabbed, right? And in our way, our culture is a black magical culture because we're so materialistic and we just want to grab things and make everything an object and a commodity. Whereas a more white magical approach will always show you that the universe is already trying to give you what you want, if that makes sense. So let's take our love example, right? A black magical approach would be, you're trying to get something, you're trying to take something. And I think, like, for instance, the pickup artist guys, right? Like that were really popular a while ago. That's kind of like a black magical approach to love and attraction, because it's, I have to do these certain tricks and do these NLP and do these type of things to get somebody to like me and, and have affection for me. And it's this materialistic view and this idea of just grabbing and taking. But think about this for a second. I mean, we have this overt thing, which is doing a magical action or set of techniques for getting someone to like you. But what's the underlying message you're sending yourself by doing that? If you're telling yourself, I have to do a certain, kind of conniving technique or ritual to get love, okay, that's what's going on the conscious level, but what's going on unconsciously? What's the message that you're sending yourself, not the other person? What are you telling yourself by doing that? You're basically saying, I have to trick people to like me. You're saying I'm not worthy of love. You're saying I'm not, I have to steal love from other people. I have to coerce love from other people. That's what you're telling yourself. And that's a very unhealthy thing to tell yourself. So you can see this whole pickup artist thing, it's really, just as an example, not to pick on one thing, but it's really what people keep telling themselves over and over again, unconsciously, non-linguistically, is that they have to coerce love out of the universe. So they're telling themselves they're unlovable over and over again. And that's a very sad type of thing. As opposed to, look, the universe is trying to give you love. If you just stop and slow down and look around, you might see people around you. You might see somebody that's been in your life, all this time. You might see somebody that's been in your life, for maybe a year or a couple years or more, or maybe just a little while, that is in your life because they want to be in your life, and you might see somebody that maybe you've overlooked, and you might say, oh my God, this person's been here all along and I didn't even see it, and this love has been available to me. The universe is already making love available to me right now, right this instant, and I was too dumb to recognize it. You hear people say this all the time. It happens all the time. I really believe, I choose to believe, and I know it to be true from my experience, that the universe is constantly giving us what we need and constantly wants us to grow and be happy, and is always giving us more and more of what we need in this moment. And if we just calm down a little bit and quiet our mind and step out of ourselves, like I was saying earlier, then we realize we start to get the message. We start to get the sense of, okay, all right, I see what's right in front of my eyes. I see, I feel, I hear what the universe is offering me right now, right this instant. I understand where I am. I understand who I am. And we understand that the universe is constantly giving and giving and giving. And we just have to slow down and accept and learn to accept with gratitude, right? And I know it might sound a little hokey. I know it might sound a little new agey, but I really found it to be true. And that's the white magical approach, is to access, your highest sense of truth, whether you call that the universe or God or infinite, or, infinite consciousness, or whatever you might call that, is to slow down, let go a bit, and be humble a little bit and say, okay, what's the message? Help me to get the message. And you can always talk out loud. You can always communicate out loud, whether that's in ritual or meditation or whatever way is best for you. Because I really believe the universe is providing us with what we need to grow in this moment right now. So that's the white magical approach. And you can see, I hope that you can see and understand how more effective that is. How much more effective that is, and how much more that builds you up and fills you with self-esteem, And I think a good way to pass on the differentiation between these two approaches is, I always think of the black magical approach as kind of like Gollum, from Lord of the Rings. Or The Hobbit, the black magician is like the black magician is like Gollum, where he's clenched down and he's kind of got this warped, twisted view of himself, and he sees himself as unlovable, and often magicians will, before they learn to let go, which is critical, magicians will manifest this type of archetype where, even without knowing it, and a classic thing also is a magician who hoards all of their knowledge and hoards all their techniques and their priceless knowledge and power, and it's theirs. This is mine. Me. This is mine. This belongs to me. Look at all these incredible things I know, and all this secret arcane knowledge and lore, and these incredible rituals I can do. It's my precious, right? You may know people like this. You may have been somebody like this. I certainly have. And, but when we're like that, we forget two things. One is that the universe loves us and is always giving us what we need, if we just know how to receive. The second is that we need to be like conduits. You know, the universe energy comes into us from the universe and flows outwards. You know, none of us created any of this stuff. You know, we're just passing through this existence. You know, magic is not owned by, nobody owns magic, right? We're just kind of participating with it and dancing with it in this moment and passing through it. And so let go and enjoy it and enjoy the ride, right? Because life is just a ride. And magic is a particularly fun ride in the greater ride of life. You know, it's a fun way to ride life. And don't clench down, because I really think that all the black magical approaches, whether it's misusing magic to affect people, or simply clenching down and trying to force things to happen, you know, trying to force, it all comes from fear. It all comes from lack mentality. It all comes from fear that you're not good enough, or fear that love is not going to be given to you. And it's all a head trip. It's all bullshit. And it all comes, in the end, the thing I want you to remember is it all comes from clenching down, right? It all comes from clenching. And I mean that symbolically, and I mean that physically also. You know, when you're in those mind states, chances are your body's going to be clenched down. You know, you're going to be hunched over. You're not going to be breathing properly. Your shoulders might be down. You might be looking down. You know, change it up a little bit. You know, just learn to breathe and relax. Put your shoulders back. Put your chin up. You know, smile a little bit. You know, go outside a little bit, and let go, and understand that the universe is always working through you. And let it work through you, and let go and let it pass through you, and don't cling to it. Don't clench. You know, Buddhism is so good about this. You know, they're so on point about not craving experiences or not clenching on things, not just remembering that it's kind of a passing magic show. You know, it was another reason that I like the word magic, because it reminds us that life is just a magic show, and it's got dazzling lights and like incredible adventure scenes, and some things that might be scary, and some things that might be exciting and warm and wonderful. And it's got all of this stuff in it, but it's just a magic show. And it's just a magic show that's here for us to enjoy and not take too seriously. And so that's really the attitude. The white magic attitude is just to enjoy it and let go and experience life. You know, it's just such a beautiful gift. It's like you go outside and you've got all the magic that you need, the whole universe right there before your eyes, you know, and if you just let go and you don't clench and you open up and you breathe and you smile, and the universe will just start working through you, and just set your ego to the side and slow your mind down and calm your mind down and just breathe and be, and magic will start happening, you know. All you have to do is become aware of it. All you have to do is change your focus. Put your focus on the magic of life and be thankful and acknowledge it when it happens. And don't try and own it. Don't try and grab it. Don't try and clench down on it. Just observe magic passing through you, and observe your life becoming more and more magical every day, with every passing day, with every passing moment. And for me, that's the greatest gift, you know, just to be aware of the magic of existence and what a gift it is. You know, even the negative experiences, because those, it's often in those that we learn so much. We learn so much about ourselves, and we experience so much growth. You know, even the most painful experiences can become some of the most fruitful ones. We grow the most out of those if we choose, you know, if we meet them with consciousness and compassion. So that's my long and short way of saying that I started this by just wanting to do kind of like a almost like a cut and dry explanation of what white magic is and what black magic is. But I think we went on this, this real, vision quest, as it were. And so what I want to leave you with is I want to say black magic is to try and take something from the universe by some type of technique or, scheme or process, or to try and make somebody else do something by some type of scheme or process, which is always to get something for yourself. Whereas white magic is to just lay back, relax, and remember that the universe is trying to give you that right now, right here, right this instant, and to allow the universe to give it to you and accept it, and to become the type of person to constantly be working on yourself, to better yourself, to expand your horizons, your mind, and to expand yourself into the type of person that is ready to handle those experiences that you want. If you don't have something in your life, maybe it's like what Morrissey once said, which is, you just haven't earned it yet, baby. So, with that, thank you for listening to me on this very experimental podcast. And please visit magick.me, which is magick.me, which is my school for magic, where you can access a huge range of information, video trainings that I've recorded. I'm constantly adding more and more. I'm improving these things. I spend all day, every day trying to figure out how to improve everything that I'm doing and provide better and better experience for you. And there's so much stuff on there. There's courses on chaos magic, both advanced and beginner level chaos magic, ceremonial hermetic magic, learning the tarot, learning the I Ching, learning, meditation, astral projection. The full spectrum of techniques is represented there. I created Magick Me to be the resource that I would have wanted when I started out learning this stuff, having to cobble it together from books, when I was a teenager. And where I had to spend 10, 15 years, going all over the world and assembling all these books and putting together the puzzle. With Magick.me, I've condensed that so you can get a full training in these techniques within, a few hours. And, it's really a labor of love for me. And I hope that you'll take advantage of that resource, whether you want to learn ritual magic or just to simply learn, serious meditation techniques, or to learn things like tarot or I Ching so that you can develop a divination system that will allow you to, understand decision-making in a deep spiritual way and allow you to kind of as a guidance system and allow you to move through life that way, in a way that's informed with wisdom, as these systems allow us to do. So that's magick.me, magickme. Please visit that. Please check out the free lectures on it, and definitely subscribe if you feel called to. It's all there waiting for you. Okay, so thank you again for listening to this. There's some very exciting guests coming up, and if people like this format, I can do kind of these solo rants as well. But there's lots of podcast types that I'm going to experiment with. But definitely, please, if you're not already subscribed to the podcast on iTunes, you can also subscribe to it on SoundCloud, and I've made it very easy for you to get to. So, and hang tight. There will be more after the Thanksgiving break. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.